Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to BookTrek 2025. This is a BookTube event created by Vin at Revenant Reads. I'm one of the Dauntless Bridge crew of co-hosts, where we are talking about Star Trek all summer long. For a variety of reasons, a lot of us co-hosts, and probably a lot of other people, associate Star Trek with summer. And I've been having a lot of fun. BookTrek is almost over. The summer is almost over. This coming weekend here in the United States is the long weekend that signals the end of summer. And it feels like just 5 minutes ago that we had the long weekend that signals the start of summer. So that is weird. And I decided to go back for last night's Star Trek to reread a book that I've read a couple of times. I thought, why not try it again and see if it scares up any new thoughts. I'm not sure that I've ever talked about it before on this channel. It's from 1983. It's The Wounded Sky by Diane Duane. Number 13 in the original Star Trek numbering of these novels. It's the original crew, of course. There was no other crew. This was 1 year after The Wrath of Khan came out in theaters, and I believe that it's a story of an alien scientist named Ktilik, K''T''LK, no vowels, Ktilik, who is a Halmalki. A race of, well, as you can see, a race of crystalline, transparent giant spiders, who number among their ranks some incredible theoretical physicists, including Ktilik, the main guest character in this book. And Ktilik and her colleagues have invented a new kind of propulsion for starships, an inversion drive that will make warp drive obsolete if it works. And the Starfleet has decided to give the Enterprise under Captain Kirk the honor of giving the inversion drive a series of shakedown tests. Kirk and his crew are overjoyed about this when they get the news. They get the news right at the beginning of the book, and they're overjoyed about it because things have been a little tedious on board the Enterprise, and they're okay with the risk involved. So they go and they get the scientists on board, and we meet Tilk and get to know her and get to know her colleagues, and then the inversion drive is tried. It's implemented on board the Enterprise and then attempted. And there are weird results. Not weird enough to call off the drive, not call off the test series, which, reading this book now, I mean, I read this when it first came out and it blew me away. I loved it. Diane Duane is such a happy, intelligent writer. You can feel the joy coming off every page when you're reading this thing, and that's pretty contagious. There weren't many Star Trek novels that were this smart, this imaginative, ever. Diane Duane wrote this, and she wrote My Enemy, My Ally. They were both great Star Trek novels. Everyone thought so at the time, and I still do. But that euphoria might have blinded me at the start when I was reading this, and maybe during a reread, to the fact that after the anomalies of the first inversion drive test in this book, there would be no second. Not until those were worked out. You wouldn't keep experimenting with something that was causing weird things to happen, much less do it a second time, much less a third time. I believe that is Diane Duane pushing this book towards its narrative boundaries, as far as she could go. Now, a starship being given the task of testing an experimental drive system, well, you can't say, in writing terms, you can't say that's not a plot. You can't say that's not a plot. It is something out of the ordinary that happens to a cast of characters and might have dangerous outcomes, but it's not much of a plot. And Diane Duane knows this, so of course she has Klingons involved who want to get their hands on that inversion drive. Still not much of a plot. We know they're not going to succeed. And once you know they're not going to succeed, you know why they're not going to succeed. You can guess it. It's just tic-tac-toe. So you're not reading this for the plot, I believe. And the more I thought about that last night when I was rereading this, I found this beautiful trade paper, the mass market, and boy, did it hold up. The more when I was reading this last night, I was thinking about that and realizing, well, okay, if you're not reading this for the plot, and you aren't, then what are the other things you could read it for? We could read it for the characterization. Does it get Star Trek? It is so enthusiastic. It is so... When you read it, you'll know what I mean. It is so energetic in its narrative that the first time I read it, and certainly the second time I read it, I lost sight of how often the main characters, the core cast of Star Trek in this book, step out of character, sometimes wildly out of character. It's not just that after one questionable activation of the inversion drive, the test would be shut down by Starfleet. It's that Kirk would shut them down. I call him Kirk. He's called Jim all throughout this book. I didn't get used to that. I didn't notice it the first time. But the second time it kind of bugged me. Now it feels so much like a reversion to pre-publication Star Trek fan fiction. The fact that the main characters are often out of character in this book, often sniping at each other or quipping with each other in ways they never would, in ways that don't fit at all. As bad as that is made worse by the fact that Diane Duane is clearly one of the fans of the show. Maybe she's an original fan. She might be. A lot of the sections of this book came off like she was an original fan. And I'll get to that. But I think like a lot of fans of the show, of the original series, she thought, well, what about everybody else on board the Enterprise? I mean, we get little bits and pieces here and there. Dr. Mabenga makes one appearance. Lieutenant Stiles, the man who's bigoted against Vulcans and Romulans, he has one appearance. What about all the other people on board? We get Kirk and his command crew. But that's just for Alpha Shift, right? There are other shifts. Kirk's not in his chair all day long and all night long. Who else is on board the Enterprise? And the original idea for fans who were writing fan fiction with that question in mind was that everyone on board the Enterprise would be as interesting as the Big Seven are in the main show. That they would all be that interesting, and we just don't know it. And those fans in those original fan fiction, and also in this book, went looking for who those people would be. What positions of command do we not even hear about in this show? We get, for instance, a chief geologist. He is killed. We meet him, and he is killed in one episode of the original series. Who's his replacement? We know that there's an archaeology officer, at least one. She doesn't get killed, but she never comes back. So, who is her replacement? What about the chief of security? No small job. Who's that? I mean, in the original series, there's a little bit of anomaly when it comes to staffing. We get the impression that Scotty, Chief Engineer Montgomery Scott, is a mother hen and probably does a lot of the work in his section. Probably doesn't delegate much. We get that impression. We also get, in a more laid-back way, that same impression about Bones McCoy. And Spock has two key titles that would never be duplicated in any other show. He is both science officer, chief science officer, and also first officer. Which is why that, for original fans, that was so jarring when The Next Generation started and Will Riker is just first officer. He just has that job. And you're thinking, how hard can that job be if Spock could do both that and another job at the same time? And I think the later incarnations of Star Trek realized how silly it would be to have a position called the Chief Science Officer. That would be kind of silly. But even if you account for that, that still leaves out Chief Security. Who else? Oh, all sorts of things. McCoy tells us that he is a specialist in deep space psychology, but are there any actual psychologists on board? Precursors of the counselors from The Next Generation? And so on and so forth. You wonder who everybody else is on board the Enterprise. And for that reason, at the same time that the original cast is being done very loosey-goosey in this book, there's a lot of wish fulfillment among the original cast in this book. At that same time, we're also getting lots of other crew members. Herb Tanzer being the one who took off with fans, the one that generated the most fan mail. People wanting to see Herb Tanzer back again, wanting to make reappearances at least in Diane Duane's other novels. See, the thing about these early Star Trek novels, and I'm not criticizing it, it's a strength, is that they weren't like the Star Wars extended universe. If Diane Duane said that someone is head of security on board the Enterprise, and the next novelist said someone else is head of security, there was no obligation to harmonize those things. No one cared. So you didn't need to know. You, the reader, didn't need to know. You didn't need to know the backstory of anybody except the big main stars of the show. I prefer that. I would rather not think that I need to do homework with 10 other books. But fans wanted to know, well, could some of the characters that she's inventing here at least make appearances in her own other novels? I don't think Diane Duane ever wrote a sequel to The Wounded Sky. I know she talked about it for a long time, and so did fans, but I don't think she ever wrote one. In a way, the ending of this book precludes a sequel, but not entirely. Certainly, the idea in Star Trek of alternatives to warp drive has been worked on a lot, a lot in the show since this book came out. Most infamously, most hilariously, in my favorite single Star Trek scene, transwarp drive in the USS Excelsior. The scene from Star Trek 3, stealing the Enterprise, as anyone knows who's ever been here and suffered through wine and calzones at Hyde Cottage, it is something I'm going to show you. You might not have any interest in Star Trek. I'm still going to show it to you, and I'm still going to squeal over it, exactly the same as I did when it was first premiering in theaters. That scene makes a laughingstock out of the captain of the Excelsior, and it makes a laughingstock out of the Excelsior, and it makes a laughingstock by implication out of transwarp drive. Unfairly, we don't know what transwarp drive is. It certainly had to have gone through a ton of tests before it was installed in the Excelsior. The fact that Mr. Scott could disable it rather easily, well, he's Mr. Scott. But anyway, there's that. There's also the, what was it called again? The slipstream drive from Voyager. That also is disastrous, and the failure of which leads to one of the most memorable Voyager episodes of them all. So it's not an unusual thing. People have been thinking about it for a long time. The limits of warp drive, the limits of having dilithium crystals in a matrix in engineering, and if something goes wrong with the crystals, well, you're stuck. I think that a lot of the examples that I'm mentioning and a lot of the examples that I'm thinking of are better done than the one in this book. I hate to say that, because this is such a fun, friendly, bubbly book that you don't want to criticize it at all. Katilik is an excellent character, well drawn. And the physics discussion, at least in the first half of the book, is very, very interesting. How the inverse drive would work. It's very interesting. Diane Duane writes such interesting Star Trek fiction. It's not just, and then they did this, and then they did that. But then it gets more and more theoretical as the physics-related after effects of the drive start to make themselves known. I think the contemporary idiom now that was not unknown when I first read this book was that around the halfway point the book goes off the rails. And we see our core cast of characters dealing with a genuine crisis. In other words, a crisis like the like of which no one has ever encountered before. And that they don't exactly rise to the occasion. It doesn't feel like them at all, especially Scotty. So my BookTrek report for today is a little bit mixed. Of course, it was a nostalgia hit to go back to this book. I love it. I still do love it. But I'm able much more to see its flaws now. And I'm sorry that I'm concentrating on those. You will love reading this. If you read it, you will love reading this. Don't let me caution you out of it if you have it on your shelf and you're interested in old Star Trek. These old, is that a Boris Vallejo cover? Does it say? No, it doesn't, but it's close. It's something like that. If you're looking at these old Star Treks with the borders and the numbers and whatnot, you're wondering if this is a good one. It is. It is. And there are some little bits and pieces in here. One in particular, anyone who's read this book will know, that I simply do not know how Diane Duane got away. I do know how she got away with it. She got away with it because she was a huge science fiction fan, and not just of this franchise, but of the other towering science fiction franchise at the time. But also because no one was reading these things. No, certainly no copyright lawyer was reading these things, so you're able to get away with a whole bunch of stuff. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in here. Maybe it just wasn't the right moment for me. I did not read this with pure nostalgia goggles on. I try never to do that. I can't get away with it with a lot of books that I love, but I try not to do that. I didn't this time around and noticed more flaws this time around. But I did enjoy it. except for the ending. So that is my book trek report for today, The Wounded Sky. Now, tonight, will I go somewhere else? To Wattpad, maybe? Or to another nostalgia read? I don't know. We don't have many days left for Book Trek. I'll try to make the most of all of them. So I will wrap this up for now, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTrek.